It was a cold, rainy morning in the small town of Umuchukwu, Anambra State. The streets were empty, except for a figure walking quickly under the heavy downpour. Her name was Mama Ada. With a torn wrapper tightly wrapped around her waist and a small umbrella barely shielding her from the rain, she hurried towards the market. Her feet splashed through puddles, but she didn't care. She couldn't afford to be late. Mama Ada had one mission: to give her daughter Ada a life better than hers. Ada was her only child, her pride and joy. Everything she did, every sacrifice was for Ada's future. The neighbors often whispered about her struggles, but they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know the sleepless nights, the hunger she endured just to pay Ada's school fees, or the jobs she had to take to make ends meet. Today was no different. The rain wasn't going to stop her from setting up her small tray of vegetables at the market. Every naira counted. Ada's final school fees were coming, and Mama Ada needed to buy her textbook. The money was short, but somehow she could find a way. As Mama Ada reached her spot in the market, she knelt and prayed under her breath, "God, help me today. Bless my hands and let me sell all these vegetables so that my daughter Ada can continue her education." As she began setting up, she had a group of women gossiping behind her. They were talking about Ada. "Have you seen Ada lately? She's always with those rich girls. I wonder if she remembers her mother selling vegetables here," one of them said. "I even heard she doesn't greet her mother in public anymore. Imagine," another added with a chuckle. Mama Ada's heart tightened, but she didn't react. She knew people talked. She knew Ada was embarrassed by her sometimes, especially when her friends were around. But Ada was young. She would understand one day, wouldn't she? She wiped a tear from her cheek and forced a smile as her customer approached her. "Good morning, madam. Fresh tomatoes for you." Ada stood at the entrance of her school, surrounded by her friends. They were laughing, talking about the upcoming party at Kamsi's house. Ada's phone buzzed in her hands. It was a message from her mother. "I will come to your school today to see you. I have something important to tell you." Ada's heart sank. No, not today," she muttered to herself. "Ada, what's wrong?" Kamsi asked, noticing her friend's sudden change in mood. "Nothing." Ada forced a smile. "It's just my mom. She's, always disturbing me." Kamsi raised her eyebrow. "Your mom? Is it not the one who sells vegetable at the market?" Ada's face burned with shame. She hated that everyone in town knew about her mother's job. She didn't want to be judged by her friends who all came from wealthy family. "Yeah, that's her," Ada said quietly. "Why don't you just tell her not to come around? I mean, it's embarrassing, isn't it?" Kamsi suggested, her voice laced with judgment. The thought of her mother showing up at school in her faded clothes, holding a tray of vegetable, made Ada cringe. She didn't want to be associated with that life anymore. She wanted to be like Kamsi, with fancy clothes and expensive shoes. I think I will," Ada muttered, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Later that day, as Ada stood outside waiting for her mother, she saw the familiar figure walking towards her. Mama Ada was smiling, clutching a small nylon bag filled with the textbooks Ada needed. Ada's heart raced in her chest. She glanced around, hoping none of her friends would see. When Mama Ada reached her, Ada quickly stepped back, looking over her shoulder. "Mama, "What are you doing here?" she whispered harshly, her eyes darting around. "I brought you the books you needed for your exams, my dear. I saved up all I could," Mama Ada said, holding out the bags with a proud smile. Ada didn't take the bag. Instead, she looked away, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mama, you can't come to my school like this, eh? People are watching now," Ada hissed. Mama Ada's smile faltered. "But, Ada, I just wanted to..." "Please, just go," Ada interrupted her, her voice shaking with shame and frustration. "I don't want people to know you are my mother." Mama Ada stood frozen, her hands still outstretched. The smile on her face slowly faded. The weight of Ada's word hit her like a punch to the heart. "Ada, I am your mother," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ada couldn't meet her mother's eyes. She turned and walked away, leaving Mama Ada standing there in the rain, holding the bag of books that she had worked so hard to buy. That night, Mama Ada sat in the small kitchen of their home, her hands shaking as she tried to cook dinner. The pain in her chest from Ada's rejection hadn't eased. She had always known that Ada wanted more than she could offer, but she had never expected to hear those words that made her feel invisible. She stirred the pot of soup absent-mindedly, her mind replaying the scene from earlier. How could her daughter, the one she had sacrificed everything for, be ashamed of her? Mama Ada couldn't focus on the cooking anymore. The pot of soup boiled over, but she didn't notice. Her mind was heavy with memories. Long nights when she stayed up sewing clothes to earn extra money. The times she skipped meals so Ada could eat. The countless prayers she whispered for Ada's future, and now this. She sat down at the small wooden table, burying her face in her hands. The house was quiet, too quiet. Ada hadn't come home yet. She was likely still with her friends, laughing and pretending she didn't have a mother who sold vegetables in the market. Just as Mama Ada wiped away a tear, the door cracked open. Ada walked in, her face glowing from the fun she had with her friends. She tossed her school bag on the floor and reached for her phone, ignoring her mother completely. Mama Ada stood up, her heart heavy with that sadness. "Ada, we need to talk," she said softly. Ada rolled her eyes. "About what?" "About what happened today at your school." "Why did you say those things?" Mama Ada whispered, her voice quivering as she spoke. Ada didn't even look at her. She was just focused on her phone. "I was embarrassed, Mama. You can't keep showing up like that. It makes me feel bad in front of my friends." Mama Ada felt the sting of those words again, but this time she didn't let it show. "Ada, everything I do is for you. I just wanted to make sure you had your books for your exams. I've worked so hard." "That's the problem, Mama," Ada interrupted, her voice rising. "I don't want you working so hard like this. I don't want people knowing you are a market woman. Do you know how embarrassing that is?" Mama Ada took a deep breath, her heart aching. "I understand, Ada. But do you also know how much I love you? How much I've sacrificed to make sure you have a future?" Ada's face softened for a brief moment, but it was quickly replaced with frustration. "I didn't ask you for this, Mama. I didn't ask for this life. I want more. I want to be like my friends." Mama Ada's shoulders slumped. "I know, my daughter, but I'm doing my best." Ada didn't respond. She picked up her bag and stormed into her room, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the small house and Mama Ada flinched. The pain was unbearable, but she couldn't force Ada to understand her. Not now. She sat down again, staring at the door. God, please help me, she whispered. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Mama Ada and her daughter grew wider. Ada avoided her mother as much as possible. She spent more time with her friends and less time at home, only coming back late at night. When she did speak to her mother, her words were short and her tone was cold. Mama Ada watched helplessly as her daughter slipped further away from her. She tried to talk to Ada, but each conversation ended in an argument. Ada was tired of being poor, tired of her mother's sacrifices, and tired of being judged by her friends. One evening, Mama Ada sat alone in the small living room, sewing a new batch of clothes to sell. Her hands moved slowly, her energy drained. She glanced at the clock. It was past 10 p.m. and Ada still wasn't home. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Mama Ada's heart raced. Who could be visiting at this hour? She quickly wiped her hands and hurried to the door. When she opened it, her heart sank. It was Chijioke, Ada's closest childhood friend. He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Mama Ada, good evening, he greeted her. Good evening, Chijioke, she replied, her voice filled with worry. Is everything okay? Where is Ada? Chijioke hesitated before speaking. Mama Ada, I'm sorry to come so late, but I saw Ada at a party tonight. She was with some friends, some people who are not good for her. I'm worried about her. Mama Ada's heart skipped a beat. A party? Ada told me she was studying for her exams. Who were those people? Chijioke sighed. They are older boys from another town. I don't know them too well, but they are known for causing trouble. Ada was with them, and I didn't want to leave her alone. But when I tried to talk to her, she told me to mind my own business. Mama Ada's leg felt weak. Thank you for telling me, Chijioke, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I will talk to her. After Chijioke left, Mama Ada sat down, her mind racing. This wasn't the Ada she knew. What had gone wrong? What had gone so wrong? How could her daughter stay so far away from her? How had her daughter strayed so far? She knew she had to do something, but what? How could she reach Ada before it was too late? The next morning, Mama Ada woke up early, her mind filled with worry. She had barely slept, thinking about what Chijioke had told her. As she prepared breakfast, she heard Ada's door creak open. Ada walked into the kitchen, looking tired but pretending nothing was wrong. She reached for the bread on the table without saying a word to her mother. Ada, we need to talk, Mama Ada said, her voice firm but gentle. Ada groaned. Not again, Mama. What now? I know about the party. Chijioke told me everything. Ada froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. Chijioke needs to mind his business, she muttered. No, Ada, this is serious. Those boys you were with, they are trouble. I don't want you hanging around them, Mama Ada said, her eyes pleading. Ada rolled her eye. Mama Ada's heart shattered. She had heard those words before, but they hurt just as much now. She reached out to touch Ada's hand, but her daughter pulled away. Ada, please understand me. I understand perfectly well, Mama. Ada interrupted her, her voice cold. I don't want to end up like you, struggling and selling vegetables. I want a better life. And if that means distancing myself from you, then so be it. Mama Ada's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Ada, I love you. Everything I have done for you. Ada didn't respond. She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house, leaving Mama Ada standing alone in the kitchen, her heart broken beyond repair. Mama Ada sat in the kitchen long after Ada had left, the echoes of her daughter's harsh words playing over and over in her mind. She couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. Ada was slipping away from her, and no matter how hard she tried to hold on, her daughter kept pushing her further away. She looked at the half-prepared breakfast on the table and pushed it aside. There was no point in eating. Her appetite had vanished along with the warmth she used to feel in her heart. She had worked so hard, given so much, and yet it wasn't enough for Ada. The tears she had been holding back all morning finally fell, streaming down her face. She didn't even bother to wipe them away. What was the use? She had lost her daughter. That evening, Mama Ada went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the day. As she lay in bed, she thought back to the days when Ada was a little girl, full of joy and innocence. Back then, she used to run into Mama Ada's arm every day after school, excited to tell her about her day. Now, those days felt like a lifetime ago. God, please help me, she whispered into the dark. Help me save my daughter. Ada didn't return home until late that night. She had spent the day with her new friends, trying to forget the argument with her mother. The older boys she had met at the party were exciting, different from anyone she had known before. They talked about money, cars, and living a life far away from the poverty of Umuchukwu. Ada was drawn to them, to the promises they made of a better life. But deep down, Ada knew her mother wouldn't approve. She could hear Mama Ada's voice in the back of her mind, warning her to stay away from those boys. But Ada was tired of living in fear. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about everything she had said to her mother. There was a part of her that felt guilty, but the feeling was quickly buried by her desire for freedom. She didn't want to be tied down by her mother's struggles anymore. She wanted something more, something her mother could never give her. The next day, Ada met up with her new friends again. They promised her a good life, and she didn't hesitate to follow. They went to a nearby town where the boys had connections. There, Ada felt like she was part of a big, different world. A world where money flowed freely and people didn't worry about where their next meal would come from. But as the day wore on, Ada began to realize that she was in over her head. The boys were getting into dangerous situations, and she didn't know how to get out. She was too proud to get back home, too ashamed to admit she had made a mistake. Back in Umuchukwu, Mama Ada couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She hadn't seen Ada all day, and Chijoke hadn't seen her either. Mama Ada had gone to the market, hoping to distract herself by selling vegetables. But the nagging worry about Ada wouldn't leave her. As she packed up her tray at the end of the day, a familiar voice called out to her. It was Kamsi's mother, Nneka. "Ah, Mama Ada, how are you?" Nneka asked, smiling kindly. "I'm fine, Nneka. How is your family?" Mama Ada replied, trying to sound cheerful. "We are all well, thank God. I wanted to ask, have you seen Ada today?" Kamsi mentioned that Ada has been spending time with some boys from another town. "I'm not sure, but I heard they are not the kind of people you want your daughter around," Nneka said, her tone serious. Mama Ada's heart dropped. She had feared as much, but hearing it from someone else made it feel more real. She forced a smile. "I will talk to Ada when she gets home." But inside, Mama Ada was panicking. She had to find Ada. She couldn't let her daughter get lost in a world she didn't belong to. As soon as Mama Ada got home, she went out again, walking through the streets of Umuchukwu, asking anyone she knew if they had seen her daughter, but no one had. The sun began to set, and Mama Ada's heart raced. Where was Ada? Ada sat quietly in a dimly lit room, surrounded by boys who had promised her adventure. But now, everything felt different. She could feel the tension in the air, the danger that lurked in every corner. One of the boys, Ugo, was speaking in low tone with another man she didn't recognize. Ada couldn't hear everything they were saying, but from the way Ugo kept glancing at her, she knew something was wrong. The excitement she had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a deep sense of dread. She wanted to go home, but how could she? She had burned so many bridges with her mother. She had said things she could never take back. What if her mother didn't want her anymore? Suddenly, one of the boys turned to her. Ada, we need you to do something for us, he said, his voice low and serious. Ada's heart skipped a bit. What is it? She asked, her voice trembling. The boy handed her a small packet wrapped in brown paper. Take this to the bus station and give it to a man named Chema. Don't ask any questions. Just do it. Ada stared at the package in her hands, her mind racing. She didn't know what was inside, but she had a feeling it wasn't anything good. This was the moment of truth. Was this the life she wanted? Back home, Mama Ada knelt on the floor, tears streaming down her face as she prayed. God, please bring back my daughter to me. Protect her wherever she is. Don't let her fall into danger. Her heart was heavy with fear, but she had no other option but to trust in God. She had always believed that God was watching over her and her daughter, even in the darkest of time. But now her faith was being tested in ways she had never imagined. As Mama Ada whispered her prayers, a knock came at the door. Startled, she quickly stood up and opened it. It was Chijioke. He looked nervous, his eyes shifting from side to side. Mama Ada, I think I know where Ada is. Mama Ada's heart leaped with hope. Where? Tell me, Chijioke. Where is my daughter? Chijioke took a deep breath. She's with those boys again in the next town over. I overheard them talking about something dangerous. Mama Ada, we need to get her out of there. Without another word, Mama Ada grabbed her wrapper and followed Chijioke into the night. She didn't know what they would find, but she knew one thing for sure. She was going to bring her daughter home. The night air was cool, but Mama Ada's heart was burning with fear and determination. She and Chijioke moved quickly, the narrow roads of Umuchukwu stretching out before them as they headed towards the next town. Mama Ada's footsteps were heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of the unknown. Chijioke led the way, his face tight with worry. Mama Ada, I know you are scared, but I think Ada will listen to you. You have to talk sense into her. Mama Ada nodded, though her chest was tight with doubt. Would Ada even listen to her? They had grown so distant lately, and her daughter had made it clear that she didn't want anything to do with her mother's simple life. As they approached the town, Chijioke pointed to a small run-down house at the edge of the street. That's where they had been staying. Mama Ada's heart raced. She could hear voices from inside the house, laughter mixed with something darker. She prayed silently as she approached the door. When they reached it, Mama Ada took a deep breath and knocked. The door was opened slightly and a young man with a hard expression peered out. What do you want? He asked gruffly. I'm here for my daughter, Mama Ada said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. I know she's in there. The boy smiled. You must be Ada's mother. She's fine. She doesn't need you anymore. Mama Ada's heart clenched at the words, but she refused to back down. I need to see her. Please let me in. The boy hesitated, but before he could close the door, a voice called from behind him. Let her in, Ugo. It was Ada. Mama Ada's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit and Ada stood there, looking more lost than Mama Ada had ever seen her. For a moment, the two just stared at each other. The silence between them heavy with everything that had gone unsaid. Mama Ada began softly. It's time to come home. Ada's face hardened. Mama, I don't want to go back. I don't want to live like this anymore. Mama Ada's heart ached, but she kept her voice calm. I know you are tired of struggling, Ada. I know you want more, but this, she gestured around the room. This isn't the way. These boys don't care about you. They are using you. Ada glanced at Ugo, who was watching from the corner, his eyes cold. For the first time, doubt flicked in her eyes. You don't understand, Mama. They promised me a better life, Ada whispered, her voice trembling. I can't keep living in poverty. I do understand, Ada. I have been poor all my life, but I've always worked hard to give you the best I could. These people, Mama Ada pointed at Ugo and other boys in the room, they will destroy you. Ada's lip quivered, but she stood her ground. It's too late. I've made my choice. Mama Ada stepped closer, her voice firm but full of love. It's never too late, Ada. You can still come home. We'll figure things out together, just like we always have. Ada's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl Mama Ada used to know. The girl who used to laugh, the girl who used to trust her mother with everything. But then, Ugo stepped forward, his presence looming over them. Ada is staying with us, he said coldly. She made her choice. Now she has to live with it. Mama Ada's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. No, my daughter is coming home. For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, Ugo lunged towards Mama Ada, grabbing her arm roughly. Get out, he growled. Before anyone could react, Ada screamed. Let her go. The room froze. Ugo stared at Ada in disbelief, but she didn't back down. I'm leaving. I'm going home with my mother. Ugo's face twisted with anger, but he let go of Mama Ada's arm. You will regret this, he spat. Ada didn't respond. She grabbed her bag, her hands shaking, and walked towards her mother. Mama Ada held out her hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ada took it. The walk back to Umuchuku was quiet, but the silence between Mama Ada and Ada wasn't as heavy as before. She stayed close to her mother, her head down as they moved through the dark streets. Chijioke walked a little behind them, keeping an eye out for any trouble. Though his heart was filled with relief, he had feared the worst. Thank you so much for watching today's episode with us. Please tell us where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe.